Welcome to Red Bulk Podcast. This podcast was created by James Schwarz, aka TalentHatter, to facilitate the need of a community-centered podcast concerning YouTube and its surrounding medias. This idea is phase 2 of an ever-developing plan to provide a voice to the communities of YouTube. On today's episode, we sit down with NowWeAreAllTom and discuss starting up new projects as well as how young YouTube is compared to other medias. Today's music is provided by Ardie Collins. You can find him on YouTube as the Cooper365 Project. This podcast is executive produced by Hey Earthlings, aka Noah Roth. Thank you, Noah, so much for your donation, and we are excited to have you on board this team. If you are interested in being on the podcast, please send us an email at redbulkpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear your stories.
Once again I try to escape something made of joy.
My name is Tom, although there are many who call me Mr. Tom. I am on YouTube. I have a channel called NowWeAreAllTom. NowWeAreAllTom, which is somewhat difficult to say, but it's my name. And I do mostly vloggy stuff, but some other weird stuff as well. And so that's probably the main thing that YouTube people would recognize me from, if they recognize me at all. But the other kind of big project that I'm involved with at the moment is a podcast called The Chapter Titles Were So Good, which is voice only and has me and my friends, the Peter and regular Tom, and we talk about Harry Potter every week, one chapter at a time.
Very cool. And then you've also done a web series on your channel called Tomline. Is that correct?
This is true. It's what I would kind of describe as a it's almost kind of like a Lonely Girl kind of thing, where it's presented as a series of vlogs. But isn't really. I mean, it is in a sense, obviously, to a certain extent it is, because it is me talking at a camera, but there's this sort of linking element throughout them that sort of becomes more obvious as you go through.
So how long have you been doing that for?
Well, that was essentially Tomline Season 1 was a single month-long Vita project, essentially. Not Vita. Okay. It wasn't actually Vita. It was June. Basically, my friend the Peter was doing a video every day in June and asked a bunch of other YouTubers that he knew to also do videos every day in June. And so I had just recently done Vita, which was only 2 months earlier. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do a video every day in a month, I'd like it to have some kind of different spin on it. So I just sort of came up with this concept, and so it was a month-long thing that sort of began on June 1st, ended on June 30th, and then it kind of ended on a cliffhanger. And so basically, just bit by bit, I've had kind of sporadic updates in the 2 years since. This was way back in June 2011, and now Here we are at the we're in the second half of 2013, and I'm still kind of doing it bit by bit. The Cloister Room. It's a podcast that I do with my friend Lewis, who is probably the largest collaborative effort I have with someone that I didn't meet through YouTube.
I'm interested to hear about you and your YouTube experiences that you've had, your social interactions over the internet, the different communities you've been involved with, and how that's affected you and the way you make content and you as a person.
The first internet community that I was ever really involved in was... The first one I was ever majorly involved in was a fan fiction community for Pokemon fan fiction that I was involved in when I was in like 6th grade.
Oh, wow. That was a long time ago.
This would have been back around like 2000, 2001, something like that. Wow. And so I'm kind of an old bee from the days, and this was a forum, a message board, which, I mean, they're still out there, but they're no longer like the main means of internet socialization like they were in those days. Pretty much every time I've been involved in a community on the internet, it has usually centered around like some kind of creative thing. In that case, it was writing, and now I'm sort of, it's video making and podcasting. I feel like that's probably a common thread with a lot of people on YouTube, that they're invested in it because it's something that they're working on creating stuff, and they're getting close to other people who are working on creating stuff. So it's an environment that I think fosters some pretty close communal connections. People I'm really close friends with through the internet is probably something like 6 or 7, but people that I've kind of become friendly with, in a sense, like acquaintances, it's, a few dozen. I'm definitely a small channel, so I'm not like widely watched or anything, but I feel like I've a pretty large percentage of my audience is people that I have gotten to know, at least in some sense, which is kind of how I like it.
I definitely agree. It keeps everything a bit more friendly. It keeps everything a bit more honest, and you're open to all of these interactions that you wouldn't be if you were, say, one of the million subscriber channels.
One of the things that kind of guides the way I make stuff on the internet too, because whereas larger channels, like, for instance, you say Charlie Is So Cool, like, Charlie has made videos where he's talked about, I'm scared and stuff like that, where he's talking about he's concerned with how he's viewed by you, where you is his audience, and that's an impossibly broad swath of humanity that could be pretty much anyone. So he's basically he basically feels in some way beholden to a very large group of people that he couldn't possibly know anything about. Whereas with me, I mean, there's some of that because obviously I don't know everyone who watches my videos, even though it's only generally like a couple hundred. But for me, my brain when I'm making stuff like that is much more focused on what is, this particular person or that particular person or these particular people. And it's usually I'm expecting comments from certain commenters, and I'm wondering what they're going to say when they see a certain video.
Let's talk a bit more about the wonderful world of podcasting and doing startups. You're definitely someone who has had a lot of experiences on the internet with creating things and starting new channels and new projects. What do you think is the most difficult thing when you're trying to do a startup?
I think obviously the most difficult thing is always going to be building an audience. And one of the things that I found difficult in podcasting, and still find kind of difficult to this day, especially with the somewhat larger of my two podcasts, the chapter titles were so good, is getting people to listen to it who are not accustomed necessarily to listening to podcasts. And I think this is probably something that any YouTuber has experienced, that there are some people who go to YouTube every day, look at their subscriptions, and watch new videos. So the idea of subscribing to a channel and checking it frequently for updates is completely normal behavior to them. But then there's a sort of a broader world where, I mean, you're not going to convince, Uncle Bob and Aunt Sally to subscribe to your YouTube channel if that's just a completely foreign behavior to them. So when you're starting a new project in a new medium that you're not already in, it can be kind of difficult to get like your audience to follow you. We started, the chapter titles were so good, myself, the Peter, and regular Tom, back late 2011, and for months or even like years up to the present day, I'm still getting people who followed me on YouTube and are like, "You have a podcast? I didn't know that." Because it's just kind of difficult to get people to follow you from one medium to another.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely some resistance there with the bleeding over from one audience to another. Some people might miss the video where you announce a new project, or they just might not think that they'll be interested in it, so they don't give it a chance. But there's definitely that sort of disconnect.
Especially with podcasts, because I think there's still a pretty big segment of the population that doesn't know what podcasts are really, or has only some kind of vague idea of what they are, but doesn't have like a habit of fitting them into like a media diet, or know how to seek them out, know how to listen to them. It's just because of the nature of the internet, these are all new things that sometimes seem to us like they've been around forever. Like, I can barely imagine a time without YouTube. But YouTube is not even a decade old, is it?
No, I don't think so. I think the first video was uploaded in 2004. I was close. The first YouTube video was uploaded in 2005.
Right, so it's getting close to being 10 years old, but that's not a very long time in the grand scheme of media history.
It isn't. It really isn't. And that's one of the things that I like to harp on a lot when people are like, oh, you can only make videos that are 4 minutes long, and you can only do things such and such a way. And really, the rules are still being established. There isn't a direct set that defines what you can and cannot make.
I certainly hope that there never really is
I agree.
a firm set of rules, because you do definitely see over the past few years, certain things have calcified in certain ways, like brightly colored thumbnails and, all caps video titles, and there are certain, and, of course, keeping it very short. There are certain things that have sort of developed in a certain way, which is fine. I just don't think we should ever get into the mindset where that's the only way to do it, because this is sort of the old media world that we left behind, which had its own set of rules as to this is how we do it. So why would we just leave that behind and then create a new set of rules? Why not just, make something that's much more free-flowing and completely up to the creator to decide what kind of content they want to make and the user to decide what kind of content they want to consume. I feel like the YouTube community is going to, over the next several years, and has kind of already started not being a YouTube community as such. I feel like the community aspects of YouTube are something that Google has no real financial interest in, or at least they think they have no real financial interest in. And their interest in YouTube is developing, large-scale, super professional, regular content, which a lot of which is great. But
yes,
I think that what was once a community of, video responses on YouTube and people subscribing and commenting there and people really forming a community there on that website is going to be something more along the lines of people forming communities around these other, satellite things, such as I feel like Wonderly is becoming that. Another cool site that I only really just found out about in the past couple of weeks is Watch It With Me, which is pretty cool.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah, I only found out about that when someone wrote an article about my web series Timeline. I had never heard of Watch It With Me, but when I got a tweet saying that article had gone up, I was like, oh, cool, this is a site I've never heard of. I think it's possible that the brand new thing that Hank and John Green just launched, Subbable, could prove to be a component of that. And this podcast, if it's successful, could kind of very well fit into that niche as well, where the community of online video is no longer something happening on YouTube. YouTube is just the technology that's letting us put those videos out there. It's just the plumbing, and that the community is something that we kind of have to build ourselves wherever we can on sites like those, on Twitter, on Tumblr, Facebook. Right. If you're into that, I'm really not, but yeah,
YouTube has become less of a center for the medium, for the communities, and more of just another pathway.
Definitely.
It's developed from just being a little clump on the internet into sort of a spider web.
I think that's a good analogy, yeah. It's not going to be centralized anymore, and that is probably for the best.
I agree. I think that we have a lot more opportunities with added social media sites working in conjunction with YouTube. Like you said, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, all those different sites allow us to reach many different people and in many different ways. It allows for various forms of communication, and it's accessible. Accessibility is everything right now.
Definitely. I just want to say hi to anyone who watches my channel and say hello. I also want to say hi to the panelists on Less Than Famous, because I am very sad that I was not going to be able to be at VidCon to see that panel. I'm looking forward to seeing the video, which you have promised me you are going to provide.
I have. I just got through all the logistics today of figuring out which cameras I was going to use and got my tripod set, and I'm ready to pack and head off for VidCon next week. So exciting things are happening, and I will get that video out to everybody else, as I have promised multiple people. Tom, thank you for being here today, and thank you for the lovely interview. I've loved everything you've had to say, and I hope everybody else has gained something from this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for today's episode. This podcast can be found on Twitter, Libsyn, Tumblr, Facebook, and iTunes, all under Red Bulk Podcast. If you would like to donate monetarily to support the podcast and our production needs, you can donate at our Patreon page, also at Red Bulk Podcast. My name is James Schwarz, and I will see you all next time.
I would own the sky.